impact of the climate change on them. So when we talk about Africa, we are talking about the continent with 1.2 billion people, with 50 countries and more than 1,500 language, which is a very fast growing continent. Through Africa, though Africa was historically not responsible for the green gas emission, she is responsible for only 3% from the carbon emission. They are the most continent affected by the consequences of climate change. And the tragedy is that the consequences are irreversible. And the people that who had a little or no thing to do with this are the most affected people on the continent. So which has been done by developed countries actually. So this effect was had been done by developed countries. They are ones who suffered and paying a lot and the price of the catastrophic impact of the change. So the shocking fact that 55% of the world poorest ones are from African families, and failing to achieve our goal to tackling the climate change crisis through an immediate action, through measures agreed by the countries, mean that more than 180 million people will be pushed towards poverty. Extreme weather conditions, drought, floods will impact on the health in many ways, exploiting the medical condition of most of the people in the country. Foodborne disease and waterborne risk illness between 23 and 2030 and 2050 will be increased by the climate change impact, and will be expected to increase by 250 million people will be died through this impact from malnutrition, diarrhea, and heat stress. Children are the most vulnerable groups who are suffer from the impact of the climate change. The African agenda provide an effective framework to ensure that the government should take an action to ensure the right of the children to have an access to a healthy life and to have access to the medicine as well. So to ensure the respect of the child rights, including every child survive and has a healthy childhood, and every child grew up well nourished with an access to a basic necessities, have quality education, and to protect them from the impact of the armed conflicts and disasters and displacement. So the question is, with the economic crisis and the huge challenges that faces the continent, will we be able to achieve our goals? So now let us welcome our guests. So we'll start with Amira Saber, is an Egyptian member, Secretary General of Foreign Relations Committee, and she is the Vice President of the Egyptian Social Democratic Party, responsible for planning and development. And also she's a member of the Egyptian Coordinator Committee of Party's youth leader and the politician. Amira is currently pursuing her PhD from Swiss School of Management, and she was appointed to be a board of steering committee to oversee a national dialogue between the government and the opposition. Welcome, Amira. And we have also Dr. Nancy Abdelhadi. Nancy has an over 25 years of professional experience, including international relations, and she has worked for a leading a multinational companies as well as a diplomatic and international organization in the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. And she has held a master degree in diplomacy and international relationship. And Mr. Josh Nower. Yeah, Josh is a serial technical entrepreneur who has two success exists and ceaseless fascination about how we can use an emerging technology and data to make a decision for a better future. He is currently a co-founder of Preseed, which is a US-based company, and also was it interesting that he was asked by President Barack Obama to be joined the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology to work in creating and implementing open data initiatives. Dr. Karim. So, Dr. Karim Badreddin, welcome, Dr. Karim. He's an associate professor of economics, finance, and sustainable development and entrepreneurship in Heliopolis University for Sustainable and Development, and he is a visitor professor in Zuwayl University. So, welcome to all the you. So, we will start with Ms. Amira Saber. This is a parliamentary member. Amira, are you, as you are taking a different, wearing different hats as a parliamentary member and representing youth and also having an NGO, and you are working in a different initiatives. So, can you tell us what is the role of parliamentary members in order to tackle the climate change in Africa? Okay.
Thank you. First, I'm happy to chair the panel with such esteemed panelists, and I'm sorry that I had to run in few minutes to join another panel. Your question is articulating, and it's a very, really important one. Why? Because the Global South, actually, the whole Global South, is having a kind of a critical issue on advocating the rights versus the Global North, which has historically contributed to the climate crisis which we have right now. Those vulnerability are layered, layers over layers over layers. The layer of the international thing is how the global south could advocate the rights to the pledges which the global north has been pledging year after year without implementation. This is why actually COP at Egypt, representing Africa mainly, choose to be the COP for implementation. And I'm really looking forward that by the end of this second week, we would reach such kind of a clear path toward this implementing those pledges and finding a way out. So this is the first layer, the big layer of vulnerability. The second one is about the internal issues of how the global south, especially countries of Africa and the less privileged, they don't have the abilities, the capabilities, the scientific technology, and too many other aspects which makes them able to adapt with the climate crisis which we have like now. And I don't see that there is any easiness in the intellectual properties of how the technology could be transmitted from the north to the south between the universities as a kind of cooperation toward this moving the climate actions. That's let alone that the vulnerabilities comes in extreme weather features which we are seeing now. The last was Pakistan, and there are millions now, millions stated as climate refugees. If we are in a world with climate refugees in millions and we can take the proper actions, then humanity is still asleep. And actually, humanity is still asleep versus the tense of how the situation is. This takes me to the role of parliamentarians because it's still way under the layer which it could intervene to. And here I'm talking about the parliamentarians of the global north and of the global south because they should intervene in totally different ways. For the global north, they should oversee and ensure that their governments are really implementing the pledges which they are stating. And why that? Because the climate crisis is not very different from the COVID crisis, and we manage actually to pass this. But the COVID thing, we are out of. The climate, we are not going to be out of it without collective efforts, without gathering everyone on the table and taking ownership on this very issue from your position in NGOs, from your position as parliamentarians, as actually the people. Because people should mobilize parliamentarians and policymakers toward this intervention. And here comes a big gap of the awareness. We don't have such coverage inside the negotiation rooms, which should be convening the pulse of how it is happening from the countries which are setting their pledges on the table. So parliamentarians at the Global South have to lead the awareness of the people of whom they represent, to urge their governments to fulfill their pledges and to ease the movement of the intellectual properties, the technologies, and what is requested for the collaboration, so that we would even make a way out through what we have of abundant sources of renewable energy. And this, who has this? It's not actually the global north as it is the global south. In Egypt, for example, as you see, we are in November now, and none of us is wearing like a winter shirt. It's sunny all the day. So we have such potential for collaboration there all the time. The second thing, for the global south parliamentarians, they should first frame interventions in the legal framework which would help their countries to comply their NDCs, their national determined contributions. And this is something which we tried to do before coming to COP 2 days. Actually, I have managed to collect the signatures required to adopt or propose a bill to the parliament regarding adaptation with the climate change. And we don't have such term of climate change in our Egyptian legal framework before. And adding to this, there are some other vulnerabilities like food insecurity. Who can't now tell that food insecurity is not on the top of the issues which we should intervene to? So food security brings us to food waste, and in our countries we have millions of tons of food that is being wasted. So there is another role of parliamentarians to combat such thing. I tried to do my role and introduced another bill for combating food waste. There is also such thing which parliamentarians should address regarding the different layers of vulnerability. Where are women losing their jobs much easier? Was it children whose immunity system rising to rising heat is being affected harshly, and the consequences are too much? We are living in a country whose delta is actually threatened to be fully flooded by 2050 if an action is not well taken. There is a lot to talk about regarding the intervention of parliamentarians, but what I can say is that what they are been doing is not enough, and much more needed to be mobilizing the collective climate action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we are moving. Are you hearing me? So now we are welcoming Dr. Abla Al-Alfi. Dr. Abla Al-Alfi is the CEO of Egyptian Member Association of the Royal College of Pediatric Health, the organization which is the representative of Royal College of Pediatric Health in Middle East. And also she is a parliamentary member in the Health Committee. And actually Dr. Abla Al-Alfi has also an community arm in this organization, which is work with the children and mothers. And she had a lot of initiatives which is working in a collaboration with the different ministries like the Ministry of Health. One of these program is the 1,000 days, the Golden 1,000 Days program, which is working with the children. So welcome, Dr. Abla, and we need to welcome you here. So actually, Dr. Abla is outside the country, so this is why she is not be able to join us. So, Dr. Abla, would you please tell us more about the challenges that you see in Egypt and Africa, and what is the 1,000 Days program in Egypt that you are collaborating with Ministry of Health? So the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, Amira, and welcome for everybody. I hope I had a chance to be with you all. But actually, I'm talking to you from Thailand, where I'm attending a very important conference, the International Conference of Family Planning.
Dr. Abla, can you raise your voice, please, because the audience here is not
Can't
hearing
you hear
you.
me?
Yeah, now
Okay.
it's better.
It's okay. So I'll saying good evening for everybody, and thank you, Amira. And I'm here. I'm sorry, I wanted to be with you, but I'm here talking to you from Thailand, where I'm attending the International Conference for Family Planning. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Yeah, we can.
Okay. And it is not far away from what I'm going to talk about, because everything is talking about the universal health coverage. And let me start my comment from Africa 2063 agenda, which have been set 10 years ago for transforming Africa for a very powerful continent working for the future. They put an agenda to improve economy, to improve health work, to improve industry, And this agenda planning that by 2063, people are able to stand the future or to create the future Africa, which will lead with its resources, with its wealth everywhere in Africa, which is not used so far. But the very important factor among this preparing for 63 is the human factor. And if we compare from 2023 to 2063, this is 40 years. So we have to start concentrating on building the human being of Africa from 2023, targeting 63. And this is the golden 1,000 days. Now, what is the 1,000 days means? Means a period of pregnancy and the first 2 years of life. The literature says that during this period, 85% of human power, human body health, human mental health, human psychological built up, and even the norm of a human being is being set during this 1,000 days. Imagine for a man who is 60, 70, or 80, 85% of his capabilities is built during these 1,000 days. And that is why it is very, very crucial to take care of our children in Egypt and Africa for these 1,000 days. And that's why it was the Golden 1,000 Days Initiative was created in Egypt and applied to many, governorates, living governorates. And now we are in memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Health to apply it throughout Egypt. But not only Egypt, actually, we think of Africa because we can't separate the benefits which go to Egypt from the benefits which we want to go to Africa. Looking for our people in Africa, we have a high maternal and child mortality and morbidity. We have girls who are not taking the rights in education and health. And also we have the climate change, which is going to affect everybody. And we have the rights for sexual and productive health for every human being living in Egypt and Africa. And this is where we wanted to start by the Golden 1,000 Days. How we are going to do this all, we created a job called family counselors. As with the family counselor, they are we don't put an age limit because we believe that every age have an impact. So we say that anyone who took 12 years of education is aware of social media use and education at distance can be part of this system. And the the family counselor receive an education for 84 hours, half of it face-to-face and half of it online, and they started to work as community health workers. And today I was attending the opening ceremony of the International Conference of Family Planning, and all people who were awarded, they are people who are working at community level, are the people who are caring for educating non-medical community activists. I was so proud of the work we are doing in Egypt and what we are going to do in Africa, because it is the language which help everybody to overcome the challenges in its continent. So this family counselor will work in the community and the health facility, hand in hand with the health workers, trying to change the practice, change the beliefs, and support women and their children throughout this crucial period. So by this crucial period, we are going to give every child his right of optimal and sure start. We are going to give every mother her right to have health support and economic empowerment, because they work with the mother to have a job and to have an income. Also will help every woman denied the right for education to start reading and learning how to be not a literate person. And again, we are going to create the norm for eco friendly generation. How we are going to do that? We are going to change the habits of the families through the family counselor to be eco-friendly. So the child in the first 1,000 days will see everything around him as eco-friendly. He will see his mom putting the light off, taking care of the water, using the different type of garbage bags for different things, working with green energy, and all this behavior which is eco-friendly will be photocopied and stored in his mind. Also, he will listen to every eco-friendly behavior and he's going to record it. So by time we are changing the behavior of the families to be eco-friendly and to have jobs which is eco-friendly, and in the same time we are creating the norm for a new generation which is eco-friendly. So we were going to have a sustainable long-standing change of the generations to be able to overcome the community change and the weather change which we are facing all, and what is Amira was talking about. So 2030 to 6030 is 40 years. So our generation in Africa who are going to start by 1/1/2023, by the beginning of 63, there will be 40 years. They will be well built, health wise, they are stabilized, psychologically, they are stable, mentally, they are fine, and also they are eco friendly to lead the world. So, by the first day of January 2023, we are going to launch the first 1,000 days for Egypt and Africa to end by 30th of September 2025. And throughout this 1,000 days, we are going to count down for ourselves what changes we have created in Egypt and in Africa. So I'm pulling the effort of everybody to support us for our 1,000 days initiative, which is taken by Ministry of Health in Egypt and also by the president to be a presidential initiative. And I'm looking forward. I talked to many people from Africa, and we are working together to launch it actually in Africa as well. Thank you for your listening, and I'm open at the end of the panel discussion for any question. Thank you,
Thank
Amira.
you. Thank you, Dr. Abla, for your interesting speech. So now we are going to ask Josh. So as an entrepreneur and a co-founder of one of the United States based company working in with the farmers to helping them to implement different strategies that helping them to increase their revenue, and also working with indigenous groups. So to in your point of view, how can the private sector from the developed countries can work with the people from developing countries and with Africa to make a partnerships and to work to help them to adapt with the climate crisis?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It's really exciting to be here in Egypt as part of this conversation and dialogue that the whole world is coming together for. We're obviously here to talk about climate, and we're here to talk about how the problem of the fact that we've had many decades of too much carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere and not enough of it being removed from the atmosphere, and which causes the climate problems that we have. And it turns out that even though much of the North, the global North is responsible, the industrial North is responsible for much of that carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, the solutions to the problems of climate change actually exist in some of the poorest countries in the world, which are mostly agricultural based. The reason why that exists and why that opportunity for helping to be a part of leading edge of the solution to climate change goes back to a very basic concept. The best and cheapest way to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is through photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, as we all know, comes from plants, and who on this planet participates and interacts with tending to the most plants all the time, and that is farmers. And basically, we believe that it is possible to solve the climate crisis, or at least to start taking very big steps towards solving the climate crisis, by engaging with farmers of the world and engaging them in financial activity that rewards them for the ecosystem services that they provide to all of us on the planet. Now, why is this important? Farmers, there are over 2 billion farmers in the global south, families of farmers in the global south that live at or below the poverty level in the countries in which they live. They are responsible for tending to gigatons of carbon in the plants and soil that they are managing, and yet less than 1%, and in fact 0.03% of all carbon credits, which is the currency with which global markets trade carbon, come from agricultural sources. Most of them come from, honestly, 1,000, maybe a couple thousand projects around the world managed by wealthy corporations. And there is a very big barrier for farmers and families who are sitting on the solution to this problem to actually engage. So what we have done, and what I think we need to see more of, is creativity and entrepreneurship, where the private sector can start to step in and implement programs and projects that perhaps governments aren't quite capable on their own to do, which is fine. And the governments should set some guidelines, and then private sector can work within those guidelines to help solve the problem. So here's how it works. Farmers globally, smallholder farmers specifically, basically are on the front lines of deforestation. So 80% of the deforestation that's happening in the world happens because industrial agriculture comes in and pushes smallholder farmers off their land and makes it so that the carbon that is on their land gets released into the atmosphere. And that accounts for a very significant percentage of the carbon that gets emitted into the world today. If we can save those smaller holder farms, allow them to stay on their land, provide them the economic incentives so they can support their families and achieve many of the types of outcomes, social and welfare outcomes that we want to see, then we are solving the climate crisis and helping families at the same time. So the way we do this is we've implemented a technology that allows us to work with smallholder farmers individually as business partners with us. We work with them to where they use our app that we have created on a phone, and that is they can register their farm with us. They walk around their farm and describe the types of vegetation they have, the crops that they're growing, where different soil practices are that they're doing. It takes less than 3 to 10 hours a year of work. So it's very little work for a farmer to do this. And we are able then to use satellite technology and other types of artificial intelligence and lots of software and fancy processing to help calculate the amount of carbon down to a 3-meter square resolution on their property. And we are then able to take the individual tons of carbon and create a carbon credit out of them and sell those carbon credits into the global carbon market. And currently we started our pilot project this year with 8,700 farmers in Brazil. And this year we'll be bringing 2 million metric tons of carbon to market, making us one of the largest carbon projects on the planet. And basically all sourced from smallholder farmers that in Brazil that are responsible for 70% of the food that people eat in Brazil come from those small farmers. And so not only are we working on climate and helping families, we are doubling the annual income of those farmers in Brazil. And we know that that model will work elsewhere as well. But we also are helping to stabilize food systems in local countries, because when industrial agriculture moves in, all that usually is grown are very massive cash crops like soy and palm, which aren't necessarily the types of food that are needed. In the regions where we work in Brazil, our farmers have a total of 140 different food products that they sell and produce on their land. And that means that there's a lot of diversity, biodiversity on their land as well, which also helps protect water, helps create habitat for species. And so when it comes to what corporations are looking for when they are buying these carbon credits, which we can have a talk about if we want to, about if that's a good thing or not. But when they do, they are buying not just the carbon, but also 11 other SDGs that are data that we're collecting with our farmers that can be mapped into what they need. It makes it a very valuable product that corporations will continue to buy for a long period of time to come.
So you are working in Africa as well. You have told me that you're working
Correct.
in Africa, and are you planning to work more?
That's correct. So
Invest-
in 2023, we will be expanding into Africa. We are currently surveying which countries to start with, and very excited to be here in Egypt. I spent a little bit of time along the Nile River in Luxor, and was amazed by the diversity of crops that were being grown and the freshness of food that was available. And it was amazing to see the amount of carbon that you have here in Egypt that could be a part of the climate solution. And so we're very excited to continue that conversation and explore. And we are also working in other countries, exploring right now in Africa to bring online, because there's a tremendous amount of smallholder farmers and green spaces with rich soil that we can work with to monetize that carbon.
Okay, that's great. So we are waiting for you to work in Africa and in Egypt. So
Excellent.
so near. Okay, so now we need to welcome Dr. Mashkoor Idris to join our guest speaker. Dr. Mashkoor Isa is a medical doctor with a passion of global health, climate action, and youth leadership. He has a master's degree in public health and strives to be a voice for a health equity. He serves as a youth ambassador for European Cancer League and a climate reality leader, and serve on the global environment and the climate conversation initiatives team, as well as the Yongo Health Working Group, where he advocates for climate action, including its intersection with health. Welcome, Dr. Mashkoor. So now the question to Dr. Nadine. Sorry, I'm sorry. Not Dr. Nadine. So Dr. Nancy, I'm so sorry. So the question is Dr. Nancy, to Dr. Nancy. So Dr. Nancy, as you have an effective and major role in leading a pharmaceutical company which is working in Middle East and Africa. So what are the challenges in your point of view? What are the challenges that facing Africa regarding accessing the medicine and vaccine in Africa? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be joining such a distinguished panel, members of the panel. So, of course, I think we all agree here, and I think most of us here at COP27 can agree on some of the basic, I guess, statements like continent of Africa is the least in terms of contributing towards the issue of climate change. And on the other hand, we are the most affected. But I think we maybe didn't have enough of the discussion as to the details as to why we are the most affected as a continent. And I'm just going to give you some simple examples. And one is because, as Josh had mentioned, Africa and Africans, their livelihood depends tremendously on agriculture and farming. And when you do have these different catastrophes as a result of climate change, it obviously indirectly affects not only their livelihoods, but of course it affects also the continent's food security. It affects and causes actually water scarcity. And I want to talk about also the issue and how it relates to the family, or how it relates to women and children specifically. So if you look at 50% of the global deaths, you will find that affects children under 5. The sad part about it is that these children are dying because of malaria, they're dying because of diarrhea, they're dying because of tuberculosis, they're dying because of issues or diseases that can be treatable. So the issue here is access to affordable, effective, and safe medicines, vaccines, medical equipment, and medical supplies. COVID-19 pandemic actually exposed how vulnerable our continent was in terms of having access to not just, those medicines and vaccines and medical equipment, but also access to the healthcare system. So not only was the healthcare system overburdened, but also a lot of people couldn't even access healthcare. And that is, again, a direct result also of climate change because of these disasters, whether it be floods, as we've seen in Sudan and we've seen in other parts of the world. This is causing also for people to not be able to access the healthcare that they need and deserve. From a pharmaceutical perspective, our not focusing and not having enough investment in developing our own, as a continent now, our own manufacturing or production of medicines, vaccines, medical equipment, and technology, obviously it's going to keep us in a vulnerable situation once the next pandemic comes along. At the same time, it's also important that we look at that because, as we talked about earlier, and the effect of climate change on the family in terms of affecting their Africans' livelihood, the idea of developing and investing in manufacturing and producing drugs in Africa actually would create millions of jobs. So this is something not only important because it would allow Africans access to these medicines, but also would create jobs and would directly benefit Africans in terms of their livelihoods. I just wanted to say also, the other issue that's affecting us is as Africans as well. If we speak as a continent, and I'll give you an example. So when you have a country like South Africa, so it's a large country, when they are procuring vaccines from abroad, they're getting it for a better price than a country like Seychelles, because it's a smaller country, so they're paying a lot more for those vaccines. If we actually somehow unify our procurement in the meantime, as an African, as the continent of Africa, so we bring down the price of those vaccines or those medicines for all the African countries. The other thing is too, before we can start looking at, which I think we need to look at, developing our own medicines and vaccines, we have to actually develop the market. Because at the current moment, 99% of vaccines come from abroad. We import 99% of vaccines. 95% of the medicines come also from abroad. So where's the market? So in order to encourage and to attract investors in the pharmaceutical industry in Africa, you have to really develop the market as well. We have to, as African nations, start to trust medicines and medical supplies and equipment that is actually produced here in Africa and start prioritizing that versus looking at getting those products from abroad. So this is something also very important, how we view and how we look at our own products. So I think in a nutshell, and just to kind of summarize, obviously Africa is in a position where there are good opportunities in such discussions and such forums like what we have here through the COP27 to not just repeat, I guess, what we kind of already know about the effects of climate change on our continent, but to come up with really good solutions and partner with others. And I like to hear the words like Global South, because I think through South-South cooperation, this will be the most effective way of pooling our resources as a continent, of working together, of bringing our experts and sharing know-how and best practices to be able to actually really make that dream a reality. And I think it's very possible, and I think we have the capacity. Right now, majority of the pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa is in North Africa, almost zero in sub-Saharan Africa. As pharmaceutical companies in North Africa, we have a responsibility to also share our best practices and our expertise with our fellow African countries. And with investment from other partners, we can help them develop also their manufacturing capabilities, and again, produce African medicines, vaccines, medical equipment, and supplies. Thank you.
Okay, great. So from your speech, we can conclude that the financing is one of the major challenges that's facing.
We need investors.
Yes. So the question now is to Dr. Karim. So when we talk about the climate change in Africa and its consequences, one of the major challenges that facing the continent is the financing. So to can adapt and mitigate the consequences of the climate change. So based on your experience and from economic point of view, what do you think? So, what are the challenges that facing the continent, and what are the opportunities that we have to tackle this problem?
To start with, I would like to point out that the problem of climate change has been tackled by Egypt for a very long time. In fact, the issue of the climate change started even before COP1 in Berlin. It started with an agreement on climate in 1979 with its protocols, and chiefly the heavy metal protocol and the Gothenburg Protocol. And Egypt has been active all the way through these agreements and protocols. And we know that the UNEP they started their work on Agenda 21, which led to SDG, the 17 SDGs. But I would like to draw your attention that at this time, the Secretary General of the UNEP was an Egyptian. Is the former professor Mustafa Kamal Tolba, who was the head of the UNEP from 1972 to 1990. And he became the UN High Commissioner for Sustainable Development. So Egypt has been there all the time. That's why Egypt should be the role model for Africa. But we should emphasize more what is going on in Egypt as related to climate change. It's not only the organization of COP27, it's more than that. For example, to deal with the climate change, we have to deal with the energy sector. And as regarding the energy sector, Egypt is now moving to a very big plan to renewable energy. So the current usage of renewable energy instead of fossil fuels, which are the main cause for the heat and the climate change through the emissions of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, we are using several integrated plan of renewable energy. We have the biggest solar energy station worldwide now in Bamban in Aswan in terms of generation, and number 4 in terms of storage. We have wind energy, we have hydro energy, tidal energy, and the share of renewable energy to total energy generated in Egypt now is 22%, and by 1935 it will be 42%. We are doing 40 new cities, and the share of renewable energy on these cities are from 40% to 60%. But these are G4 cities. The first G5 city, Ras Al Hikma Al-Jadida, the renewable energy share will be, and they started on it, will be 100%, which means that Egypt is playing a very important role in providing a role model for all Africa. I attended a lot of African conferences here in Cairo, in the new administrative city, and they were very eager to apply the Egyptian model. And we are coordinating through the African Development Bank, and we are coordinating through the Afrexim Bank. And luckily, Afrexim Bank headquarters is in Cairo, and the African Development Bank headquarters is in Cote d'Ivoire, Abidjan. And we are also coordinating with the African Union organization in all these projects. When we come to agriculture, Egypt now is applying the carbon credit as a beginning. But the law was issued, and I was attending a conference at, on Friday and Saturday, not this Friday and Saturday, the previous one. It was about pre-COP 27, and it was about the solutions. And the vice president of the Egyptian Stock Exchange announced that in 1 year time, the carbon credit exchange will start in Egypt officially. The idea with the carbon credit is that you can reduce your carbon emission, but the amount of carbon on the atmosphere is the same. So the only way to bury the carbon is through agriculture. And the main concern of the Egyptian plan concerning the carbon credit is to apply it on the agriculture sector. We are having now 5 million faddans as cultivated area. We are promoting this area now through a plan, and is gradually succeeding to be 10 million faddan. And we are also trying to apply this new system to the 10 million faddans, and we are moving to organic agriculture as well, which will increase the export of Egypt. Another thing related to the families' role in this is that we are applying something called the QR code, and having this QR code on the product, which give you an idea of how the supply chain works. So we make sure that all the supply chain is green. This means that when you transport the product, it has to be with cars, electric cars, that is empowered by solar energy. And we deal also with another component, the vulnerable people within this supply chain. For example, we are empowering women. We are empowering especially women who are taking care of families. So some of these women, their husbands died or in jail or left the family. We give them the priority to be in this supply chain. So this is another social aspect of the supply chain that we are applying within the agriculture sector. And through the QR code, you can get this product. And there are some logos, like for example, Economy of Love. So you find it now on some Egyptian products. And we are transferring this to the African market as well. For the time being, there are a lot to say, but for the time being, I will end up with the Egyptian big plan of green hydrogen. You know that green hydrogen will make the zero carbon emission, and the world is moving to zero carbon emission by 2050. So the green hydrogen will replace oil and gas totally. And we are having big projects now for green hydrogen. Some of them are regional, like NEOM with Saudi Arabia. Some of them, as the president announced, with Siemens in the Suez Canal zone in Sokhna. So we are also moving to different aspects to have integrated, holistic approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Karim. So now the question is Dr. Mashkour. So there is a large number of public statements and reports have suggested that the climate change in Africa is a threatened, problem, the security threatened. So it's affecting all 4 dimensions of the food security, like food availability and food accessibility and food utilization and food system stability. So based in your experience as you are living in Nigeria, and this is one of the African countries which has a leading role in renewable energy and using renewable energy as well. So, and you are leading a team in the climate reality leader. So, in your point of view, how can climate change impact food security and impacted health as well?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on this panel with this distinguished panelist, and it's okay. It's more better now. It's a good question, and particularly because Josh talked a bit about it, and also Dr. Nancy. When we talk about food security, it has a lot of intersections, particularly with health, as you mentioned. And you rightly said it affects the four dimensions of food security. So the fact that climate change affects food production, and that is the first step in the food supply chain. So ultimately, it affects all the other elements. Now, in Africa, or particularly in Nigeria, a lot of people are engaged in agriculture. So it's a means of their livelihood, it's a means by which we produce food for our growing population. Nigeria has over 200 million people, and the population is rising every year. So there is need for us to develop and ensure that there's food security. The effects of climate change has caused droughts, it's caused flooding, particularly now in the past 4 or 5 months. Nigeria has seen the worst flooding in the past decade. We had over 1.3 million people were displaced, over 600 people died, more than 100,000 hectares of land were rendered inundated, and we had 80,000 homes destroyed. So what does this mean? It means that there's no food production. People that were engaged in farming practices in the land, they can no longer do that. They're not able to cater for their families. So there's loss of food supply. It affects education. It affects health ultimately, because when you're not healthy, when you're not eating, you won't be healthy. And also, the flooding that has destroyed all these farmlands, it's caused increase in waterborne diseases, increase in malaria, because these habitats are suitable for these pathogens to grow in. So all this, when you take it all into consideration, it seems that yes, Africa, as you mentioned at the beginning, we don't contribute that much to climate change, but we are suffering the impact. It's actually saddening, and at some point you get to the point where even you can't cry anymore, because what do you say to a family who has a large piece of land that they're farming? They've already planted their crops and looking forward to, in the next 2 3 months, they're going to harvest bags of rice that they're going to cater for their families, for the community, and all of a sudden the flooding came and the whole farmland's gone, their houses are destroyed. Some families had to just stay in an abandoned house on the road for 2 weeks. The children are sick. So the whole situation. Yes, we are here at COP27 and we're able to talk about this, but we really need to connect with what is actually happening on the ground. The people that are actually bearing the effects of this. Who is championing their voices? Who is going to help them solve the situation? Everyone needs to contribute. It's not just me, it's not just you. It doesn't matter whether you're in the agricultural sector, you're in the energy sector, you're in health, you're in business. Everyone has a role to play. Climate change is affecting everybody. If we want to actually mitigate this problem, we all need to contribute our own quota. Just something small. Start with yourself. If you want to be a change, it's better to start with yourself, and that way you can influence the people around you, yourself, your family, your colleagues. And that way, if every one of us decides that, yes, we are standing today, we're going to do something to make a change and make the world a better place, I believe we'll all be for the better.
That's great. So now at the end, Josh, I have another question. So you're working in Brazil and different countries. So what is the difference that you have found when you are working with Brazil and the other African countries? And do you think that you will face more challenges in African continent or?
Well, so there's technical answers to your question in terms of different legal statutes around whether it's legal to sell for individuals to sign over the rights to sell the carbon from their land, which they have to do knowingly, and we make sure that that's a part of it. So there has to be a legal framework in place for us to work. So we do a legal study before we enter any country to make sure everything is set in that way. There's also issues, especially in smallholder farming communities. There are different styles of ownership, whether it's ownership of land. Sometimes the farmers that are farming the land don't own it, and sometimes they do. There's a lot of issues that we have to figure out. But that's just all part of the setup of what we do. Once we have those issues figured out, the data collection, the analysis, the protocol that we use is actually standardized, and it's one protocol and one standard that we use for the entire world, actually. And by doing that, that allows us to get to scale. And climate change solutions, the one thing we need more than anything else is scale. It's why entering the continent of Africa is so exciting, because as it's been mentioned, you have over 1 billion people, you have lots and lots of agriculture, lots and lots of carbon that is stored in the ground. And so the opportunity to scale that is very exciting. And the challenges to do so, actually, from a technical perspective, that's not where it is. The challenges may be in legal frameworks. And then have we found on the ground agricultural support partners to work with that already have those relationships with the farmers? That's part of our model for how we enter into a new market. We do it in partnership with a local organization who's built into the economic model of support. So it can help them grow their organization as well as the farmers grow their incomes.
Okay, that's great. So now, Dr. Nancy, do you have a recommendation that you want to end the session with?
Actually, if you allow me to speak also, I mean, one thing I forgot to mention, or two things actually. One thing with regards to the building up or our capacity for manufacturing or producing our own drugs and creating jobs. The idea is these factories also should be green factories. So, for example, our company we have 8 factories. We employ over 8,000 people. Recently, we spent more than 2.5 million just to convert our energy to renewable energy sources, and we're looking to do that for our other factories. So the idea is not just about building more factories to contribute more to the CO2, but actually building factories that will have less of that impact. So, because we are from an industry that does have an impact on the environment, so we have to think in terms in the future of how to minimize that impact and offset it as well. The second thing is, and this is very important, is we, again, as a company, we partnered with the government in the 100 million health campaign, 100 million صحة campaign, and that was to diagnose and treat hepatitis C. And we were very successful in doing that here in Egypt, since Egypt is the country that was most affected by hepatitis C. We have this issue in Africa. We have diseases like hepatitis B and hepatitis C, infectious diseases that when we have pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, or even with the crisis going on, economic crisis, a lot of these diseases get swept kind of under the rug, and they're not dealt with or addressed. This is something we're really emphasizing, the 1 million campaign to help and diagnose and treat Africans from those infectious diseases like hepatitis B and C. And this is something we have to, again, address because they're treatable.
Okay, that's great. Dr. Abla, are you with us?
Yeah.
So do you want to add something about so we have a different program. So as a member of MRCBCH, I know that we have a different program towards the health of the children and the mothers, and we have a great experience in different cities and for like Azbit Khairallah. So do you want to explore more about this program, the family counselor program that's working in Azbit Khairallah, and how it really help people there to reduce the stunting level and other measures? So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Amira. Actually, yes, it's like anything. When we started in Daqahliya in 2015 as a group of doctors who are educated in Royal College of Pediatric and Child Health, and we could see the difference between our children in Egypt and other children born in developed countries, we were not sure of the proof of the concept that getting the health workers or the community activists who are non-medical and training them they will help to improve the indicators of child health and family planning. And after 3 years of work in the Qahliya, we could reach to a very impressive results, which we ourselves we couldn't believe it, that we could reduce stunting in the Qahliya from 21% to 14%, and we could reduce obesity from 17% to 13%, and we could reduce neonatal mortality just by implementing baby-friendly initiatives and keeping the moms with their babies in the NICU, taking the baby skin to skin. We could reduce perinatal mortality for preemies by 25%. Who can say no for practice like this? We increased the exclusive breastfeeding among the community where we worked from 13% at 6 months to 52%. And in the same time, by the concept of convincing the mother this is the right of their children to separate pregnancy by the 1,000 days, to rear the child alone, and to have 1 year for the mother and for the next baby, to prepare the mother for next pregnancy. This mandates separation of 4 years. We could separate pregnancies among 43% of the sample by 4 years, 20% by 3 years, and 25% they didn't get pregnant again because they had 1 or 2 children. So it was so impressive. But because we compared it to the national figures, we said, who tells us that the national figures apply to the community where we applied it? It was a proof of concept, but was deficient of pre-implementation assessment of the area where we worked. So we repeated the trial in Azbet Khairallah, and we had the pre-implementation assessment, which showed us that stunting among the children at 2 years was 31%. Imagine, among every 3 babies born in Azbet Khairallah, 1 of them gets short and low IQ because they are not nourished well and they are negatively reared up. There is no positive parenting, and there is recurrent infection. That's why we started, even at 1 year, it was 17%. Also, breastfeeding rate, exclusive breastfeeding rate was very low. On this implementation assessment, we started implementing our trial again, and we could reduce stunting. Nobody can imagine that among our group of 170 children, we had only 1.4% who were stunted. By health education for nutrition, reduction of infection, positive parenting, and giving packet of food to support these families every 3 months, giving a box of food to support these children. And the breastfeeding was increased among the babies whom included in the study just after birth to 76.8%. And for babies who were taken during the first trimester to 92%. What a result to say that if you have a challenged and well-educated, skilled family counselor, they can make the change. They can change indicators, which Egypt is paying for it millions of pounds. You know, Egypt is paying 20 billion every year for stunting. Outcome of stunting. Egypt is paying 5 billion every year for cesarean section, which is 72% among the Egyptian. And if we count all the complication, Egypt is paying 120 million every year. Huge amount of money we can save to rear our children in better way. And also we'll get another added value of these children being active, healthy, high IQ to work and serve the country in a completely different way from our children now, whom we compromise their mental health from the beginning, from the first 2 years of life, or even intra-trial. Who say no for this initiative? We need to work hard. And I want to say something. Social responsibility is the responsibility of every person living on the globe. It is not for certain group and denied from others. Everyone has social responsibility towards himself, towards his family, towards the area where he's living. And this social responsibility, he can pay back in kind. He can pay back by money. He may pay back by just raising awareness from the people around him. We need to think how much we can give to our country, to our continent, and to the world as a whole. And it makes a huge change. If you was attending with me today, you will touch many African people talking about how much girls, mothers, and the children are suffering. And not only Africa, Asia, different continents. So we need to think and stand together and listen to science. Listen to science. Science say that this group of children at this certain age need the full concentration and the full work to give them their rights and their potentials to grow intact mentally and physically. And I think we will continue to do our job. We will continue to give whatever we can give in Egypt, in Africa, and anywhere we are needed to give. I got just yesterday a telephone call from Jordan that they want us to implement our initiative in Jordan. And we said, yes, we are going to do that. So thank you, Amira, for giving me the floor once more.
Dr. Abla.
I'm very happy that to be part of this panel discussion. I enjoyed listening for everybody in the panel discussion, and we're looking forward to cooperate with all of them in doing and
sure.
making life easier. Thank
Promise
you.
we will do. So at the end of this session, I would like to thank all of the guest speakers, Josh, Dr. Karim, Dr. Nancy, and Mashkur. I thank you everybody for attending this session and being with us today. And thank you. So do any of you have a question to the speakers? Oh, do you have a question? So we still have 10 minutes actually, because they informed me that we can still till 6. So
Thanks. Can you hear me? No? Test.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your talks. It's really compelling. My question is to Josh. I'm from Kenya, and I think it's very interesting what he's trying to do with smallholder farmers or just farmers in general, because a lot of people are doing agriculture and they're, like he said, are contributing to sequestering carbon, but they don't even know. So my question is, and I think you also touched a little bit on this, but maybe you can elaborate a little further. In Africa, one of the biggest problems we have is land rights. People don't have title deeds. So maybe perhaps what is your the way that you're going to be tackling this, and is it something that maybe here at COP we should try and also negotiate or speak to African leaders to make the rights an issue or something that they should discuss, so that we can actually contribute to the carbon markets?
Land tenure and ownership is a very big problem that needs to be solved. When you're dealing with populations, we're talking here about families today and families that are in crisis. Many farmers have to move around from different pieces of land, to make ends meet, to from one year to the next, maybe moving around where they are farming, if they're lucky enough to be able to have land to be able to farm on. And so it is a very big challenge. It makes it difficult for solutions to scale quickly when you have to, on a country by country and sometimes sub-geography of country basis, deal with many different forms and styles and structures around how to make sure that the stewards of the land are not always the same people as the land owners, And so how do we make sure that land stewards are actually being compensated for the work that they're doing? If that land is owned by others, how is that shared in either a communal way with larger communities and indigenous communities? We work with this a lot. And basically, we have to understand before entering into a geographic region all of the different ways in which land tenure takes place. And we then adapt our methodology for measurement and specifically payment back to communities and individuals to deal with that appropriately. And so we already deal with probably more than a dozen different models of land tenure just in Brazil that we're dealing with. Many of those will apply in Africa in certain ways when they're repeated. And this is yet one more way in which global south to global south transmission, if you will, of these methods can actually be a positive benefit. Because if we've dealt with the situation before, like a cooperative or communal land ownership in one region, then we can apply that model in another, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, for implementation. So we look for, because we're a business, we look for optimization in how we do that. And always our focus is on, though, how do we make sure those land stewards, the people who are actually hands in the soil, if you will, are the ones that are actually at the center of getting compensated. And then if others need to be included in communities or landowners, or if there's leasing happening, I mean, there's so many different models that basically we're accounting for that. And for us, a big part of that process is transparency. So in many places that we work, we're bringing a level of transparency to the ownership of the land and the land stewardship of the land in ways that even governments on their own may not have direct views into. And so that's a very helpful process in that. So thank you so much for asking the question.
Okay, so do anyone have other questions? So I have a very small question. I'm not sure to whom should I ask this question, but maybe, so do any of yours have faced any like a harmful farming? I mean that tobacco farming, for example. So this is one of the ones that have a pollution to the environment, and also it have a negative impact on the farmers. So have you faced any case of this, or you, for Mashkoor in Nigeria, do you have tobacco farming in your country? And do you face any cases of the farmers and they have like a negative impact from this type of practice? Have you find any of these?
With tobacco farming in particular, I wouldn't say I'm familiar with that in Nigeria, but I would say obviously yes, it might have negative practices, but the main aim in whatever farming practice one engages in is to try to find a balance. So if, for example, it's the best practices that are happening in other countries, you see how people are trying to adapt and mitigate it so that it doesn't really affect negatively the people and the communities, and then you can implement it in your own country. But that's what I would say would be the best way to go.
So, Dr. Karim, do you want to add?
There is a very famous practice in Africa about harmful farming, which is related to cacao. Cacao is used in the production of chocolates, and many of the multinational companies producing chocolates were accused of using children in farms producing cacao, and many mortality rates were reported. And there were very big campaigns in European universities to boycott these products, and it worked out, especially in Switzerland, Germany, and many European Western countries. But I would like to add something that for the floor, you should know that we have a very promising project for families in Egypt, which is called Haya Karima, Decent Life. Decent Life, its budget now is around 800 million pounds over 3 years. It is dealing with transforming the life of all the people in rural areas to better, and I would rather say, because I've seen this, excellent services, and this is an ongoing project. Also, I would like to tell you that we have a very big, many initiatives by the Central Bank of Egypt for the microfinance. And the microfinance is dealing with the very, very poor people who, for example, a woman selling handkerchiefs or paper tissues on the street. So they provide them with machinery, training, and making projects together. So within the Egyptian model, it's very, very generous. I advise you to revise the Egyptian model. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Karim. So at the end, because we are running time, so thanks for Mashkour, Dr. Nancy, Dr. Karim, and George. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.